Hello, MavMind Collective, and welcome to another episode of the HypnoSellers Show. Today we're going to talk about internal versus external mind frames. Yes, this is another personal preference video because I'm big on personal preferences. If you've seen some of my other videos, I talk about these different ways that people have preferences towards one thing or another. And it's really just a filter that we all apply in order to get through life, in order to deal with life. And a lot of our personalities you can think of someone's personality as a combination of all these personal filtering preferences that they have. And when you apply them all together, then you kind of know that person and you know their personality. So this is one specific one that I like to use with prospects and customers. I also use it with my boss and my teammates, my peers, even people that report to me if I have a team. I'm always trying to figure out their external or internal preference, their mind frame preference. And this is basically how they frame things in their mind. And you can either do it internally or externally as an orientation, externally or internally as an orientation. And there's some characteristics here that I'm going to go through because I think it's important to understand these specific applications of these characteristics within the internal or external mind frame. So that way you can then figure out what frame this prospect or client has, or your boss or your team or your direct reports, whoever it is you're communicating with, and you can align your communication to match their particular preference when it comes to internal or external. That way it makes it easy for them to work with you, makes it easy for them to make decisions, you can motivate them very easily, and you can develop, if it's someone that reports to you, you can develop their career and down their career path by understanding how they prefer to frame things. Okay, so in a nutshell, an internal versus external mind frame is basically how do they frame things in their mind? Do they frame it internally, meaning all within themselves? Like, are they cerebral and they think about things a lot by themselves? Or do they tend to work with groups and they need to get feedback and they need external communication with people continually in order to be creative, to brainstorm, to figure things out, to frame things, to help them put it into perspective? They need someone else, at least one other person, if not more than one, to help them. Versus the internal frame person is going to be totally by themselves. Leave me alone. I'm going to figure it out myself in my mind. That's basically, in a nutshell, this particular mind frame preference. Okay. So now let's talk about a few of the characteristics and things you can consider when you have someone that is either an internal or an external mind frame type person. You can work with them a little bit easier, and they can work with you much more easily if you understand these other characteristics. So the first one is source of validation. Where are they getting their validation from? How are they validating that the decision is the right decision, or that the way they should think about it is correct, or the process you've proposed to them is correct? How are they validating that it's the right way? A good question I like to ask sometimes is, how do you know when you've done a good job? Like, how do you know when you've done a good job? The internal frame person will say, I just know. I just have a feeling about it. I can't really explain it, but I just know when I've done a good job and when I have not done a good job. I can tell. That's what they'll say. Because it's all internal. It's all in their gut feel. It's all about the perception that they have themselves within their own mind, within their own internal frame. Versus an external mind frame person will say, I know I've done a good job when someone else tells me I've done a good job. When I receive recognition, when I win the award, when I hit my quota and I win the award and everybody recognizes me and the company is achieving this big task, yeah, then I know I've done a good job. So in other words, they get the validation from external sources versus an internal source. So that's one characteristic to kind of tell if someone's an internal or external mind frame person. Also, how are they convinced? An internal mind frame person is going to be convinced by their own thinking it through their own way, going through their own process in their mind. They're not really going to listen to you or what other people tell them. Like, if you try to tell them they should be convinced, they're going to be like, yeah, whatever. They're going to be thinking internally and they're going to check their gut and see if they're convinced or not. They don't need, and in fact, some internal mind frame people they may even say, we don't need to do a proof of concept. I don't even want to see your product because I can look at the literature and I can listen to what you're saying and I can study it, and I can, I have enough experience to know that it's probably going to work just fine, and I don't need to go through all that. So let's not even hassle with a proof of concept. I'm convinced just by talking with you, by looking at your company and how long you've been in business and how many customers you have, like they can figure it out themselves without you having to demonstrate anything to them. Versus an external mind frame person is going to be like, I need to see a POC. I need to talk to other customers that have implemented your product successfully. I need to see stats. I need to see the articles that you get. If you give me a quote, I need to see who said it, and I need to see the article you got it from. In other words, they need to validate everything, and they need to be convinced multiple times, usually 2 or 3 times. Versus an internal frame person, maybe they might just need one little thing to convince them, like maybe one external thing, and then the rest of it, they're going to internally convince themselves on the rest of it. Okay, so they don't need a whole lot of times to be convinced. Versus an external frame person is going to maybe need 2 or 3. They need 2 or 3 use cases proven out. They need to talk to maybe 2 or 3 customers to really get a sense of like, okay, to feel comfortable, to know that all this external validation and this external convincing is convincing me significantly and successfully, so I know that I can go with your product and trust it. Okay. So that's another characteristic. The other characteristic that I have on here is, where do they get their motivation from, right? So as you can imagine, an internal mind frame person is going to be motivated by their own thoughts, by their own passions, by their own, just what they have inside that's getting them up in the morning. They get up in the morning, they get their coffee, they're thinking things through internally, and they're motivated to just step into action, start making things happen. They don't need anybody telling them to go do the thing, which is what an external mind frame person does. They need other people kind of reminding them or telling them, motivating them, hey, come on, you can do it, get up, go. You can make this happen today. You just got to believe in yourself, go, go, go. That's an external mind frame person needs that motivation externally. So like if you've ever heard the phrase, you can use a carrot on a stick to motivate someone, or you can just use the stick. Well, an external mind frame person needs probably both. They need a carrot every now and then. They need a stick every now and then. Whatever it is, they need somebody doing something to get them to take action, because they're not going to necessarily be motivated to do it themselves. So you've probably worked with people like this, I'm sure, where you got to constantly tell them, versus other people, you don't have to tell them anything. They're already ahead of you. They're already done it. Before you even asked. They've already done the task. They've already finished it. So that's the difference between internal and external mind frames. Now, how can you tell? Well, I've already said it. One question you can ask is, how do you know when you've done a good job? And either they say, I just know, or when people recognize me as doing a good job, then I know I've done a good job. When they give me praise, when I win the deal, when I get paid, whatever. Another way you can do it is you can just judge based on how old you think they are. Because what I have found is that younger people in age, not all, but some in the business world, the younger they are, the more external frame they are, meaning the more external, working with people and getting validation and motivation from other people, because they haven't lived long enough to find a way to motivate themselves, or to be convinced themselves, or to think things through internally yet. Versus, as you can imagine, someone that's a little bit older, more seasoned, been around the block a few times, it's not their first rodeo, those people, they're more internal, typically a little bit more mature. So basically the more mature they are, the more internal they've become, because they've just done it so many times that they don't really care for external validation anymore. They don't need it anymore. They kind of already know if they've done a good job. They kind of already know if they're convinced or not. They kind of already have their own motivation, or they don't. It's all within themselves. So you can usually, figure out by their age. And also, if you're working with a new prospect or client, you might ask them how long they've been in this role or in this industry doing this type of job. You might be able to look on LinkedIn and see how many times they've done this particular job. If they've done it for 5 years, 10 years in this particular discipline, in a particular industry, chances are pretty good that their internal frame when it comes to working with outside vendors like you. So if they're going to be working with you and your product, they're probably going to judge it from an internal perspective, and they may need some external validation because someone else at the company is saying they do, but you might be able to convince them that they don't need to have a PLC, that they don't need to do an RFP. You might be able to get out of that because they're more internal, because they've been doing the job longer. So when you're looking for that champion within a company or trying to find a person to work with to evaluate your product, if you can find someone that's been doing it longer and has been in the role longer, typically you're going to have a much easier time to convince them, because you really don't need to convince them. They're going to convince themselves. You're just going to set things up and then they're going to take it and figure it out themselves. And they probably will skip over demonstrations, skip over RFPs, all those kind of things. That's typically why when you have those experiences with those people, that's why, because they're more internal frame versus external frame. So that's why I'm sharing this with you, because I want you to be able to spot this. I want you to be able to figure this out when you're talking with your prospects, clients, your boss, your team, your direct reports, so you can then align your communication and make it really easy for them to work with you, and it'll make your job working with them way easier too. Thank you for watching. I know you find value in these videos, didn't you? So if you like me or in a customer-facing role, I'm wondering if you want to watch another video now, all designed to help you get better at what you do every day. Or not. You don't have to watch another video if you don't want to.